Welcome back, everyone, to the Risk Intel podcast, powered by SRA Watchtower, where we share risk intelligence with experts from across the banking industry. I'm your host, Ed Vincent, CEO at SRA Watchtower. Hello, welcome to the Risk Intel podcast. Please join me in welcoming back former Bank Chief Risk Officer and current Chief Growth Officer at SRA Watchtower, Niki White, along with Ashley Saville, who is the Chief Revenue Officer and Senior Sales Consultant at Topline Growth Partners, a Richmond-based management consulting firm who optimize the infrastructure for sales, HR, and leadership functions, and who count data, software, and financial companies among their portfolio of clients. Niki and Ashley, welcome.
Thanks, Ed.
Ashley, your experience helping to optimize the sales function is an area in which I'd like to delve deeply today. CROs, ERM directors, and other risk colleagues are not typically trained in sales techniques. However, a decision to buy or invest represents a decision to change. And so when a risk leader makes a decision to invest in software, whether that's to optimize BSA or fair lending, asset liability management, risk and control self-assessment, ERM, or any other component of risk management, then this decision to invest represents a decision to change, which in turn requires selling the value of that change to a CEO, CFO, or board risk committee, who likely control the bank or the credit union's purse strings and strategic priorities. So today, I'd like to help equip our risk leaders with a tool set to enact this decision to change within their risk programs. And that'll include, the cycle of change, the decision to buy, identifying the cost of staying the same, achieving stakeholder buy-in, and exploring all the options, all of which feed into creating the business case. So before we turn to Ashley to help us navigate through this obstacle, Niki, let's start with you. And let's start with by having you help us to frame the challenge that risk teams face when they are considering change. So what are some of the key reasons that risk leaders open up a dialogue with you to begin with? And how do you approach these conversations?
That's a great place to start. So, people come to us because they're wanting change or something is not working for them. So usually the right now, what we're seeing is that most people are new to their role. Either they have grown internally or transitioned into a different seat, maybe from what they've sat in before, or maybe, as is typical with many of our clients, they're adding a new hat to an existing hat. So there's some new muscles to flex that they need, and they're like, where do I start? What do I do? They may know a lot about credit, they may know a lot about lending, or they may know a lot about operations or compliance, but they're not necessarily equipped to put it all together to say, what does this look like from an enterprise wide? So I love talking to people that say, I have a new job. What do I do? And how are you here to help me work through that? Similarly, we see some people where their organization has changed. Either they've grown through acquisition or they have launched some new internal organic growth initiative. Maybe they're getting into a completely new complex space that may get some additional regulatory scrutiny. And I think we're seeing a lot of that out there in the news these days. So they're needing to know how to change what they've always done. So just because you've always done it doesn't mean that it's sufficient anymore. It needs to continue to evolve and grow with the changing size and complexity of the institution. And then really the third thing that we often see coming to us is the existing process is insufficient. Either they have self-identified that they need to make a change, or someone externally has come in and said, thou shalt consider looking under the sheets a little bit deeper here and figuring out what you can do. So oftentimes when it's internally identified, they're finding that their processes are inefficient or insufficient. Maybe they have a series of spreadsheets, which we've talked about at length in our Hidden Factories series. Maybe they've had some turnover and found that controls have fallen down. And that if they had a better system of tracking and managing their internal controls, they wouldn't have had a deficiency that was identified, whether by themselves or by someone else.
I love I love those thoughts. That one of the things that struck me there at the beginning is you talked about folks who perhaps have moved into a new role, and taken on additional responsibility, not necessarily just getting a new job. But I imagine that it's highly unlikely that you're going to see a sales leader move into that risk role, right? You mentioned someone that might have been in credit, another part of the organization, right? Which I think comes back to, this concept that folks who move into this role are not necessarily equipped with all the skills and the experience to make that case internally, right? They are equipped to evaluate risk or evaluate credit or evaluate a portion of risk, and now they're being asked to, evaluate a team and make decisions about change and then convince others to get on board with that, and that's a different skill set. Niki, you've mentioned that some of the most efficient interactions with risk teams occur when they've done a little bit of homework. They're prepared for those conversations, right? You talked about why they might come to the table, but could you share a little bit of your perspective on what those colleagues could do, what those risk leaders could do to prepare themselves when they walk into the room to have that conversation with you? Is there anything they can do in advance before speaking to a potential partner, such as someone on your team?
Absolutely. So I would say think about your process and really lay this out in a process series of questions, which Ashley will touch on in just a minute, I think. So, and I know that because she has helped me change my process questions, which I very much appreciate having Ashley at my side today. So the way that we would typically approach that conversation is, tell me about your risk management process from beginning to end. Who are the people in place? What are they doing? And so when you think about if an existing process is insufficient or inefficient, where do you think it's broken? Where do you think that it needs to have some additional support or some additional training or some additional people, some resources of some kind? Thinking about how broad this is or how narrow. Maybe your function is working really, really well from your identification of your processes and of your risks and of your controls, but maybe you don't have that high level view across the entire institution to really bring together your credit risk information, your interest rate risk information, your liquidity information on top of your compliance and operational information. So when we often see the risk and control self-assessment function that's very mature, it's largely focused on operational compliance. The ALCO process is very well in its own silo, and the credit function is very well in its own silo. Maybe that piece is just missing at the top of the house. So thinking about the entire risk management process, who is involved in the various steps, the reports, the collecting of information, the reporting of information, which piece needs some attention. And then secondarily, thinking about how to execute on that change. Who do you have in this conversation that will help you support the change, and who will need maybe a little bit of convincing?
I'm going to try and summarize that and not do it justice here with one word, which is, right, there's a level of introspection there. So, looking in the mirror, right, looking around, right, processes, people, right, who is involved, and really taking an honest look at saying, is this working, right, or could it work better? So Ashley, let's thanks for your patience. Let's pull you in here. Niki, I think, laid the foundation for this question, which is really around the journey that risk leader is then going to embark on around this decision to buy or decision to change. And it begins, the process begins at some point, and then there's a lot of steps in it. So maybe you can take us through this cycle or this journey.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks, Ed and Niki. Niki, you almost perfectly described the whole sales process that happens internally and externally when you're looking at, bringing in some help. And realistically, that all starts with that cycle of change. And, have we looked at ourselves internally enough to say, okay, we start with like uninformed satisfaction, right? Like, nobody really thinks there's a big problem. We're good. We're doing our spreadsheet thing. We're all set. then we kind of reach this line. We're a little bit unsatisfied with what's going on, but we kind of know we're unsatisfied, but we're not unsatisfied enough to make a change. So in the change curve, we've got to kind of go down to this valley of decision. And the valley of decision is like, okay, I know I need to lose weight. I know I need to improve my process or do something different. I just don't know what to do. So to get out of the valley of decision and up into success, right? I've got to take some steps, and there's a lot of resistance to making a change or doing something different or installing technology or a new process. And so I have to have enough inertia internally to make that case for change. And so the way we do that is identifying what is the cost of staying the same? What happens if we don't make a change? What does that cost us? And not just what does that cost us like from time, but like what could that cost us in a regulatory environment? What could that cost us in not knowing what's going on really in our risk profile, and maybe we're under investing in certain areas that we could be really investing in. And so what we do is, what we think about is, how do we build that case to get to success and get out of that change curve? And so again, that's something that we find in our financial partners. It's not necessarily a muscle that they've exercised a lot.
The cost of inaction then, or the cost of staying the same, it feels like that ties back to, right, our hidden factory, episodes, and where we talked about unplanned inefficiencies and technology gaps and cultural and strategic misalignment and deviation from top of the house expectations, right? There's a whole host of content to explore there. But the cost of inaction is more than just overcoming hidden factories. How when you and Niki, right, role play this or brainstorm this, explain a little bit, Ashley, about how banks and credit unions should be thinking about the cost of inaction from your point of view.
Yeah, I think, I mean, that's step one of building a business case, right? So identifying that cost of staying the same. So again, if we're, on a spreadsheet and happy with it, like, what is the real cost to build that spreadsheet, right? Like, how much time is the, 28 different vertical leaders spending, and underneath them, all the analysts that are putting data into the spreadsheet, what's that costing us? But it's more than that. We're looking at, what is some of the cost of, what if we have an error in one of these analysts way downstream that then breaks our entire spreadsheet, but we're unaware because the spreadsheet's been working well for us all these years, right? So you start to pick apart that process that we're doing currently and look at it line by line. And issue by issue. The challenge of using a spreadsheet may be the cost of time. It may be the cost of having sort of fixed data in a moment of time, and not data that's in real time, right? And then what are some other sources? So you start to pull at that line and pull at that thread, I suppose, and think about what could this cost us from a risk perspective. So almost line by line, case by case, and if this thing happens one time or 20 times, what does that cost? And you stack up that cost. So simple, easy spreadsheet you can make. We can pull up a template for you to look at. But really, like, each identified symptom or consequence, what would that cost us? And so that's really building that case of, this is what the status quo cost. And so from there, there's 3 or 4 more steps to building a business case. But that's really the first critical component.
And thinking too, Ashley, if there aren't 28 people involved in your process, with
Right.
one of my opening comments, what if you wear many hats?
Yeah.
Thinking about the cost of how much that hat is taking away from you, and you're focusing and spending more time on managing data than actually managing the risk. What if you can take a step back and layer into your actions and into your new process the ability to think more strategically, so that you don't miss a strategic objective because you were spending more time on just executing an inefficient process with one of the hats that you have to wear today, before you move on to taking out the trash or whatever else happens to be your job of the day.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Niki. Just opportunity cost, right? And should we be thinking, should we be worried about in the weeds of the process, or in the weeds of our day-to-day job, or should we be strategic managers that are able to act on the data and the insights that this new updated process can enhance and enable us to do? That's a great point.
So let's at this point then, let's agree that the risk team has made their decision to invest or buy. And I guess if I go back to your cycle of change, right, journey or a continuum there, Ashley, there's probably a cycle of change for that risk team that might be a slightly different cycle than the whole rest of the organization, because
Sure.
it sounds like kind of chapter one, for lack of a better term, is that the risk team has to go through this and be have a level of satisfaction, and then kind of get into that valley, and then decide that they're going to push forward. But once they've made that decision and they've overcome their own inertia to move towards success, that's just the beginning of the process, right? Because
that doesn't get you there.
That's them.
Yeah.
That's not everyone else, right? So now they've got to figure out a way to bring those key stakeholders along. So I'd love to get both of your perspectives really on, well, to a certain extent, that was the easy part, was getting the risk team's heads in the right place. Yeah. Now what? Now, where do we go from here?
Yeah. Do you want me to go, or Nikki, you want to start?
Yeah.
Okay. Great. So step one, identifying the cost of staying the same inside your team, understanding that, and then the broader team, right? And making a case and thinking about that largely for the organization. The second is really communicating with key stakeholders that will be critical in this decision. I think the number that I read recently is there's about 11 stakeholders involved in a decision to buy something internally. I would argue in my sales career, it's been way more than that. But the second step is really communicating with those key stakeholders and identifying those key challenges and gaining agreement. So taking that cost of staying the same formula or spreadsheet or whatever format that comes in, and having a conversation with all of the key stakeholders about, this is the challenge that we've identified, this is what it cost us currently, should we do something about it? So that's really step two. And Nikki, I'm sure you have more real world relevant experience in that, with a CRO and what you see in your day-to-day life. So I'd love to hear that applied to a bank specifically.
And I'm thinking about it through two different lenses. As a person who's trying to enact some change, you can either go after the path of least resistance, so rally some people who are like-minded that will be a little bit quicker to ride that change curve and to come up to the top with you, so that you've got some more power in numbers there. Or alternatively, you look at the most risky area. So what is on fire that needs to be put out first, and thinking about how you approach the change and how you approach those conversations with the people, going at it from what's in it for them. What is this going to do to make your life easier, to make you shine? And I'm thinking back to our earlier conversation about developing a risk culture and how the risk department is often seen as the land of no. Really using this opportunity to turn that piece of the culture, to shift that perspective of, here I am to help you, let's be more effective together, and really allowing the risk function to become a very collaborative profit center to execute on strategy.
So that's a very different, as we talked about before, Nikki, right? That's a very different mindset. But whichever of those three techniques which you're using, right? Whether you're rallying the folks and bringing, creating critical mass with a handful of folks that are excited already, and you can get some momentum, whether you've got this, this problem event, or right, there's a real, external factor that's gonna drive people to make a decision, or whether you are evolving the function to be more than the office of no or the desk of no to. And this is one of the things that Ray Tyler talked about in one of our earlier episodes, right, about being a value add partner to the business, right? Under all of those scenarios, right, to go back, Ashley, to your point, it's about getting agreement and alignment, and getting that organizational commitment to move forward.
And I think if we don't agree on the challenge, and then what is the cost of the challenge, like, it is too much resistance to move forward in any scenario. So if we haven't built that case internally and had that discussion of this is the key challenge, the most critical component that we need to face today, and start to prioritize and look at the cost exercise, like the next steps in the process really just start to break down. Because again, if you're trying in your personal life, if you think about the cycle of change, you did make a decision to, you know, lose weight or stop drinking or whatever it might be. When you get to that valley of decision, you're like, should I do this or not? If there's anything blocking it that looks too hard, you may make the decision just to go back to the status quo. So by not having that internal buy-in on what is the challenge we're trying to fix or change, what do we want to make better, and agreeing on the cost, likely there's too much resistance to make that change.
All right, if you've gone through a rigorous process, then Ashley, right? To your point, right? You can't shortcut this, right? There is, if you do, you're just gonna hit a subsequent wall. So we've identified our key challenges. We understand the cost of that challenge, and we gain agreement or alignment that we're going to do something differently. Right. So you've got, to a certain extent, you've got stakeholder buy-in now at this point. What's the next step then in that process? Because you're not done yet.
Right. Of course, it never ends, right? There is an end though, but yeah, what happens if we don't, again, do that change and get buy-in of those key stakeholders is that you go do all this research looking at vendors and other new processes for change, and then you make a case for it and they're like, nah, it's too expensive, we're not going to do it, we're not interested. So what we want to do is, again, we're building that buy-in, and then the next step 4, is to explore options. And realistically, it boils down to 3 what sounds simple options. Number 1 is the choice to stay the same. The cost is actually okay with us and we don't need to change, or we're not ready to change, or there's other things that need to come first before we change. The second one is we can do it ourselves, which doesn't always solve the problem fully. Sometimes it does, and can sometimes zap resources, and sometimes can actually push us back to that stay the same. But that's certainly an option that we should explore and understand costs and how this can work, and maybe we can do it ourselves. And then the third option is, should we get outside help? Should we bring in an expert? Should we bring in a technology company? Should we do it a different way and have a different outside voice really helping us move the process forward? So those are really the key options that every company goes through when they think about this. You know, a decision to buy is a decision to change. And again, sometimes they have that as an internal conversation about stay the same, do it yourself, or get help. And sometimes they have a partner having those discussions with them.
Right. Staying the same, agreeing that you are willing to do something different, but you're gonna get after it yourself. Niki, maybe that goes back to one of your early comments here of, well, we're gonna put something else on your plate. Guess what? Congratulations, you've got this new role. Here are 3 more things to do. And so, you know, that may be something that an organization tries, and it, right, it may get you far enough forward. And that's sufficient. Or it might, as you said, Ashley, cause you to really kind of revert back to really staying the same. Or that third option of getting help, or getting outside help. And so I think that those are clear, that after you've got now your buy-in from your stakeholders, you've explored your options, you put those out there, and now it feels like you're at the point where you've got the elements of the business case, right? You've got the cost of staying the same, right? You have gotten buy-in and alignment around the cost of the challenge, and an agreement to move forward with a different pathway. And now you've got your options, and you've got A, B, or C, and you have the ability now, right, as that risk team, to go to the CEO, who is going to control strategic decisions, go to the CFO, who might control the budget, and then go to that risk committee, who ultimately are going to help you enact your strategic plan within the risk function. And you've got a framework now to have a conversation with them.
Yeah, and it's a great framework too to help you build a budget and work backwards to understand, like, if we do decide to get outside help or do it ourselves, which could mean hiring someone or adding to a role, like what should we spend tied to that? And so this is really a systematic way to work backwards and build a budget that makes sense based on how big the problem and the challenge really is.
We've covered a lot of ground here. I greatly appreciate it. And I also know that while we've covered a lot of ground, Ashley, we've been leaning into some of your expertise in this area, and this is not a 30-minute conversation or a 30-day conversation, right? It's a pretty sophisticated set of skills and capabilities and frameworks. And so one of the things I would ask is whether you guys would be amenable for, if anyone has a follow-up conversation or wants to have a follow-up conversation or question, to engage with them around this creation of the business case and taking them through this journey.
Absolutely. Niki and I love to get on a call together and help build these business cases for companies. So we'd love to talk.
Awesome. Well, thank you for letting me put you on the spot there and jumping in there. So I think we covered a lot here today, from the cycle of change and really preparing to have that conversation with an outside partner, being introspective, like looking in the mirror, right, Niki, as you talked about, all the way through, right, coming out of that cycle of change within the risk team to then embarking upon a similar journey with the rest of the organization, and identifying the key challenges, identifying the costs of those challenges, gaining agreement or alignment on making a change. Once you have that buy-in from stakeholders, then exploring the options, staying the same, doing it yourself, or getting outside help. And ultimately then that puts you in a position as the risk leader to have a strong business case to be able to present to those other influencers, if not decision makers in the organization. So Ashley, thank you very much for sharing some of your frameworks and rubrics and perspectives there. Niki, thank you for the practical application there along the way. And thank you both for being willing to engage with some of our followers in subsequent conversations.
Absolutely.
Thank you.